Hi folks, time for another video. I wanted to pick up right where I left off on the last video. In the last video, I had gone to a place called Kingman. I had gone to the downtown area, and I had just shown you this place called Locomotive Park, and then I said I had to stop the video. And the reason for that is that we reached a 10-minute limit. So I have found that most people do not watch videos past 10 minutes. So I try to keep everything 10 minutes or less. I'm not 100% sure I can do it on this video because I have a lot to show you. But anyway, that's the reason. So we were in downtown Kingman. I had just shown you Locomotive Park. Across the street from that, there is something called a visitor center / museum. You don't see that a lot. You usually just see a visitor center and it has some, brochures about the area and that kind of thing. But Kingman is different in that it has a lot of history to it. It's connected with Route 66. I'm sure you've all heard of that. And the old highway that used to go across the west. You go into this one and you find an actual gift shop. So they had the usual things that you'd find in a gift shop. They had the little, key rings, they had the books, they had calendars, they had all the normal stuff that you'd find in a gift shop. Interesting, on the outside of the building, it says, visitor center, and then it says the powerhouse. So I looked that up as to why they would call that building the powerhouse. And as it turns out, that building used to be, for the town, the place where electricity was generated. And, it was later turned into something else and then subsequently turned into a visitor center, but that's where it's getting the name, the powerhouse. It's a historic building. I took a look at the items in the gift shop. I don't buy a lot of that stuff, so that's a non-starter for me. And then I went upstairs, and upstairs is where they have the museum. And I went up there and got my ticket. It's $4 to get in, and you get into that museum. You also get into another museum like a mile down the road called the Mojave Museum. I didn't go to that. I paid my $4 and went into this museum. And I know a lot of you don't really like museums that much, so I'm not gonna, really go into great detail about everything. I'm just gonna hit on a few things. But it had basically a lot of the artifacts from, like the Days Out on the Prairie and all the way up to Route 66, which happened in the 50s. And, it showed some displays, like for example, one display showed a wagon, that they lived in as they were going across the prairie there. And it showed what life was like back then. And they had a lot of things up on the wall that you could read that kind of told a story. And they had some, artifacts, like they had, things they used for cultivating crops and that type of stuff. And it actually looked pretty neat. I love things like that. I love when they put together models of what it looked like back then. It's better than just reading it in a book, So anyway, after the first section where it was talking about life at the turn of the century, they had another area that they showed some of the earliest people when they first got motorized trucks. And they showed a family there. It's funny, when I walked up to it, I first saw the guy, the mannequin that's in there, driving it or at the front of the truck. I thought it was a real person at first. I was like, uh-oh. But of course they were all mannequins, and it just showed what life was like back then, which of course was very rough. The vehicle reminded me of the one you see on the Beverly Hillbillies. That truck that they drive through the town. So life was difficult back then, and they were showing that there. When you go to another part of the museum, they had some mock-ups done of what the cities or little towns would have looked like back then. So they had the usual things, like they had a gas station, and then beside of it they had a sweets shop, where you sell ice cream. And then over to the left, they had more of what the town would have looked like. So they showed a few different things. They showed a pharmacy, and I think it was a billiard place too. And they had a barber shop, and then they had a looked like an apartment building. So this is something that I'm sure they put a lot of time into, because you can go and look into each window and really kind of see all the little things they included in that, which is pretty neat. But I love seeing mock-ups like this. Even when I go to Disney World, I love going into kind of fake towns, where they've put all this stuff together. I think that stuff's neat. Then they showed a display, was a car, a Studebaker, that was popular in the 50s. And they even, this car was even replete with the mannequins inside, that showed a couple, and then it showed their child and a dog. I'm not sure you can see that in the videos, but it showed a very popular car back then in the 50s. Something you'll notice on the side, on the right-hand window of that Studebaker is it's kind of an oblong thing on the outside of the window. And that was one of the first air conditioning systems that was available back then. So this is Arizona. Well, actually I'm in California right now, but the museum was in Arizona, and it gets very hot in Arizona, well over 100 degrees in the summers. And being cooped up inside of a car can make it even hotter. So that was a new type of air conditioning system, and what it consists of is inside of that oblong metal container was a mesh material that you could get wet, right? So they would wet it with water and then slide that mesh inside of the metal container, and then when they drove down the road, the air would go through it, and it would cause that water to begin evaporating. And the action of evaporating of that water makes the air around it cooler. So then that cooler air would blow inside the car. So that was one of the first evaporative air conditioning systems they have for automobiles. And I'm sure, back then they really thought it was fantastic. They couldn't have imagined what we're gonna have today. And so then if you go downstairs, first of all, you go by a coal mine. You can't really go in it, so there's not too much to show you, but it's just a mock-up coal mine. There's a lot of coal done in that area, coal mining done in that area. And then lastly, it takes you out as you exit the building to an electric car museum. And that shows you all these different electric cars. I didn't care to look at each one independently, but it just drives home the fact that electronic cars or electric cars came about in the 20s. Or even early 1800s. They had the technology there, it just wasn't feasible back then. So there were a lot of electric cars that you wouldn't have thought even possible that you saw there. So then I exited the museum, and that was interesting. So there's a lot more about Kingman that I'm not going to cover, that if you ever come to this town, you can go look it up yourself. For example, there's buildings with murals painted on them. You can actually, go on Google Maps and find them and go to each one and look at them. That's pretty interesting. I was going to do that, but I wanted to leave some stuff for you to do yourself if you ever go to Kingman. And then one last thing I'll throw out here before we stop is several times I have driven through Kingman, right, on my way out west. And as you go through the town, then you're getting on the outskirts of town, you go through these two mountainous areas. And over on the left, there are these two train tracks that go around the mountains. And I always see every time I've gone through there, I've seen those trains going around the mountain like that. And I always thought that was so neat. But since I was staying in Kingman, I was like, this is my chance, you know. So I looked on the map and I found the road that goes back in there into those mountains. And so the next day I went back. I spent the day there, actually I went there 2 days, waiting for trains and flying my drone. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed it, and see you next time.